Hello, everybody. This is Still Rose's podcast. This podcast was created for women by women to elevate women's voices. Welcome to season 3 of Still Rose's podcast 2025. Huge thanks to all of the listeners who have been following along for this journey of the podcast developing. The fact that it's even at season 3 is like a huge deal because female podcasters drop off quite frequently. So that's like a big deal in itself. But the fact that you're all still following along and, you know, giving input and really becoming engaged. A lot of listeners have become podcast guests. So quick plug, if anybody's interested in being a guest and you've been following along, please feel free to reach out to me on any of our platforms that are linked in the description, because I still have 4 slots remaining for the Winter Spring series. So just a quick plug there. Now, I do have a guest with me today, and a little, I want to say a little special introduction for this guest, because our guest today is Melissa, which if you followed from the beginning, you know that Melissa was actually part of season 1 as my co-host. So Melissa, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It feels like such a blast from the past. And it was, and I was like, gosh, remember when we were like doing this on a weekly basis? I actually told you that I was like, oh, I kind of miss it. So thank you for having me.
I think the real remembering is when we used to get up at 5 a.m. to do it. And because we had no idea. So listeners, like when we started, we literally were like, we have no idea when we're going to fit this in. We both work full time. Yeah. We both, we're both full-time moms, wives, and all that stuff. So it was like, when are we doing this when our kids aren't going to be like in the mix? And it was 5 a.m. in the beginning. So.
Literally 5 a.m. And Mia, my daughter, was not in school yet. And it was trying to, find a time that worked for both of us, and then and then we'd be like, okay, maybe we should try like 10 o'clock at night, and then one of us would fall asleep.
And never and that's, it's funny because like it started to get to a point where I was like, I can't do nights because I would fall asleep, but then mornings were tough for Melissa because her daughter would wake up because she was an early bird.
Yes, like prior to school, oh my gosh, she used to wake up at like 6:45, and I was like, oh.
Yeah. Yep, I remember. So, Melissa and I were chatting this week, and her schedule has calmed down a bit. So now she was like, I'd like to really come back. And it's interesting because even when she stepped away from recording, she would be like, oh, hey, I have this idea for the podcast, and we would still kind of collaborate. So, I'm excited to have her for the discussion today. Behind the scenes, whatever. So for 2025, and not just for 2025, but I know like in January, people always get hung up on New Year's resolutions. And I think I said it last year in January. Resolutions pretty much are designed to fail because people bite off way more than they can chew, like right up front. And they're like, I'm going to go to the gym for 2 hours every day, and I'm really going to do this diet, and it's always like this big outlandish thing. And that's actually part of the failure, right? Is like making these big commitments. So what I'd like to challenge the listeners to do is smaller commitments, smaller check-ins. And the way that I would like people to do that, and I want to kind of bring a topic to the table here, is checking in with yourself on where you currently are, what you're feeling about your job, your relationship, your friendships, your family, and really taking stock of what you're feeling about anything going on in your life. And the reason why this is really important, and Melissa and I have talked about this, and I've talked about this a bunch on the podcast, is how you feel about a situation is your barometer for determining, is this a good situation for me? Mm-hmm. Now, the segue here and where I'd like Melissa to weigh in is, we were podcasting together the first year, I think for like 6 months or so. Like you were up until September when you had to go back to teaching. And then we kind of hit a point in the process where I think we both started to recognize it was getting challenging and that we weren't going to be able to maintain it moving forward. And the tricky part about recognizing that was when was it time to step away?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you bring up New Year's resolutions, because this year I decided that I was not making any New Year's resolutions because, like you said, they always it's it's like they're designed to fail. So what I decided was that for this year, the only thing that I was sort of stepping into 2025 with was the idea that I was going to shift my perspective, and my approach to all things, whether it be health, whether it be marriage, whether it be for with my child, whether it be for my job. I wanted to take a much more grounded approach, and sort of segueing back into what you're saying about sort of reevaluating, because I think that some of us, especially women, we have such a heavy mental load that taking, it sounds ridiculous, but taking those 10 minutes to for self-reflection, it doesn't happen unless you make it happen. And I think so part of that, like taking a grounded approach to my life with everything, is just like, is part of what you're saying is just getting in touch with yourself and checking in with yourself, because we check in with everyone else, right? Our husbands, our children, my my students that are in
Our
their,
parents, like everyone else gets a
parents,
check-in.
everyone else gets like a touch base, like, oh, how's it going? How's the week going? Like, and we don't do that for ourselves. And I think if I had this perspective back when we started the podcast, it would, I mean, I'm so glad that the podcast has gone the way it's gone, but it would have been different because I would have been able to recognize, like, I was like, no, cousin, like, this is great. Like, no, we'll just keep going. And remember, we were like resorting to recording while I was
And we're in
driving.
the car. That's right.
Yes.
So
And eventually we got to the point like, okay, wait, what are we doing? Like, I had so many balls up in the air, and like it took me a minute to be like, wait, what are we doing? Maybe this isn't the best thing for the podcast. Maybe this isn't the best thing for me, right? Like it was so much at that point. And it was funny because we were literally just, checking in with each other yesterday, and I was like, Mia's in school full time, like my life is completely different, my perspective on 2025 is completely different. And so yeah, I think it's really important, for women especially, just to be like, take those like 20 minutes spread throughout the week and like do a check-in with yourself. And and things that are no longer serving you, things that are no longer serving your family, like what are your top priorities, and things that no longer serve that don't have a place, or don't have as prominent of a place, right?
yeah.
And it doesn't mean that, look at what we're doing. It doesn't mean that you can't come back around to things. But I think recognizing that and acknowledging that we can only spread ourselves so thin. And I think you and I both have had that issue in the past where we just keep pushing, and
Right.
but it's detrimental to the big picture, right? So
So you like said like a lot. So I want to draw some through lines there too. So the gut checking, you should be doing that on a regular basis. And I've talked before on other episodes where I said like, and I'll use my husband as an example, right? When I started dating my husband, he wasn't a fan favorite of my whole family. And
no.
and there was a lot of pushback. And I remember in that time, I had just started to scratch the surface of feeling my own feelings and really living my life how I wanted to live it. Because another problem that women encounter is we do a lot of should. I should do things a certain way. And
Mhm.
we all have issues with codependency where we feel guilty about stuff. So we do things because I feel bad. Well, that's not really the reason to do things. You shouldn't be doing something because you feel guilted into it or obligated. You should be doing it because it sparks joy. So I know it sounds cheesy. Don't like put me like to the side for saying that, but like legitimately, like, are you happy with this? So when I was dating my husband, I got a lot of pushback across the board. And so I would, in my drives, think to myself, like, are you happy in this moment? When you lay down at the end of the day today, are you happy with what's going on in your life? Are you happy with the path that you're taking? And every single time it came back like, yes, Jenny, you're okay. Everyone else might not be happy with what you're doing, but you're happy, so you have to keep going. And that's how I used it. That's ultimately like my very first time doing it was in relationship to my husband. And now look, like 15 years later. So honestly, like you have to go with your gut. Now there's some times where, you know, you need people to check in with you. And there's times where, you know, if you don't really know yourself well enough to make calls, like it's good to have people as sounding boards, but you really should be the ultimate determining factor. Now, in relation to the podcast and us, you know, making the determination for Melissa to take a step back, at the time, the podcast was lighting me up like fire. And I could sense, you know, Melissa was getting stretched super thin. And so there was also an element of making room and making it okay to say, like, it's okay to step away from this. It's not going to be a negative impact on our relationship as cousins and as friends and, you know, ultimately sisters, because that's where we're at this point. Yes. But, you know, like, that's another fear there too, is when people are committed to something, the fear is, if I walk away from this, is this going to damage the relationship? Is this going to be a problem? You know, is there going to be a negative blowback? In some instances, there are. When I started dating my husband, I lost people that were my friends at the time in my life. But to me, it was more important to go this path because this ultimately was made me the happiest. So you do have to, sometimes there is a loss of things when you make decisions to really live your life the way you want. The people that are meant to be in your life are going to stick with you through it. It's not going to matter. It's going to be a non-issue.
Exactly. I was just going to say that because people that...
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you.
Care about you for the right reasons, right? That are genuinely supportive, that are invested in you as a person. I think they always want to do things to help feed your soul, right? Like they're always going to do things in perspective of okay, well, what is going to be best for you, right? And I think honestly, it again with this idea of checking in, sometimes you don't realize that you're surrounding yourself with people that don't have that approach to their friendships and don't have that approach to their relationships. So when you do make a change, and you get blowback or you get pushback or there's negative consequences, at first it feels like you're doing something wrong, I think at times. But then if you take a minute, it's like, okay, but wait, why? You know, like in the long run, was that a quote unquote loss? Or was that sort of a wake up call of like, okay, wait, who am I surrounding myself with?
Maybe
like,
that wasn't the right people to have in my life.
Yeah. And what do they really want from me? You know?
Right. Exactly. So that there's that element and that component of it. Now, and it is scary because I've done major overhauls of my life, I think about 3 times. And each time
you really have, and I'm still working on it. And
early
you're
20s,
like, no, I got this.
Remember, like early 20s Jenny, mid 20s Jenny, and then like 30s Jenny, and actually now that we're talking about it, 40s Jenny. Like, I mean, if you look at and that's okay though. We're actually supposed to be doing that because really think about this. If people start complaining around you, like, oh, you're changing so much, you're changing yourself. Well, you're supposed to. That's growth. Like,
Right, exactly.
if you're the same, if you're 40 and you're the same person you were in your 20s, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to sound like a
There's
jerk.
a problem.
You have a problem.
Yes.
Something should have happened in those ages because you're going to grow up. I was doing a meditation this morning. That involved, you meditate on sitting at a table and the different versions of you come to the table. So I had little Jenny, I had ridiculous 20-year-old Jenny, and then I had 30-year-old new mom Jenny at the table. And in the meditation, you're basically addressing each version of yourself to say, like, thank you for what you did. This is a safe space. We're all here together. And then you also think about what is 75-year-old Jenny going to be like, which, by the way, it was funny to think about. But those kinds of meditations are really impactful because each phase of your life, regardless of how hard some of these phases are serving a purpose to develop you into the person that you are going to become. And
Oh, yeah.
all the conversations that I've had with women who are in my age range, so Melissa, get ready. But like everyone who gets into their 40s gets to a place, a lot of these women, of I finally feel like I'm home. I finally feel like I'm myself because they've done the work to really recognize like this is me and I know what I want here, or I know maybe you don't know what you want, but maybe you know how to recognize it when it shows up, because that's another thing too. So the podcast that Walk Away was an example I wanted to share. Now, professionally, there's also instances of you need to recognize when you need to walk away from something. When you're in situations where you're, knocking down different doors, trying to blaze your own path, when is the right time to step away from something and say, like, you know what, this really, as Melissa said, this is not serving me anymore. This is not serving the purpose that I had wanted it to serve. Melissa, did you always know? And I actually want you to talk a little bit about when you knew about moving. And
Oh,
that set up there, because for you, I know being here and being with the family was really critical and really crucial. And it was very hard, I think, to make that determination that you were going to be like, I'm going to go do this for myself. Dusting the cobwebs off a little bit. How was that process for you?
the most difficult thing that by far that I've ever done, and it turned out to be for myself, personal growth, the hands down 100% the best thing I ever did. But it wasn't easy. Like we talked about this not that long ago. I was like, do you remember when prior to applying to graduate schools, prior to moving down to South Florida, I was like, I was ride or die. I am never leaving New Jersey. Could never be away more, you know what I mean? And being in an Italian American family, that was the expectation. Nobody leaves, nobody gets out.
You're not leaving.
You are raised here, you have babies here, you die here. Like that is the expectation. And it was the expectation that I set for myself. What I didn't realize was that I was putting in boundaries into my life that were not allowing any sort of growth for me, because I was so focused on staying on not stepping outside. And I have trouble, I think, and I think you have the same thing. Like I associate change instinctually, I think because of our childhoods, like with something negative. That change, or at least that's how I used to approach it back in my teens and my 20s. I associated sort of change with negative, something negative is happening, right? And I think through this whole process, like I was just in a really negative place. I knew that my life had to change. I was not happy at the position I had. I had worked there for like 4 years. I had outgrown it. Like it became so routine that I could do it in my sleep, and it wasn't challenging me or satisfying me anymore. And you know, personally, there was things in my immediate family that there was a lot of change happening, and I knew that I was resisting it. But I knew it's like you can only drag it out so long before you look at yourself in the mirror and it's like, okay, I need some changes. I was in the worst health of my life. Like, you remember this.
I do remember
And
that. That was
I was eating my emotions. Like, it was just not, and I was like, okay, something needs to change. And I remember my mother telling, we talk about it now, and my mother said, I prayed so hard to God, and she's not overly religious, but she was like, that it's all I had left. She was like, I was praying to God that no, and she said, I had this weird sense that I was like, I no matter where it takes her, allow her to grow and find her way, because I was stuck. I was just stuck. And at that time I was probably about 26, and I took this chance, like the girl that never. And the funny thing is that I applied to graduate programs, like for my PhD in New Jersey, and I desperately and I got waitlisted. And I was desperate, like doing everything, like contacting faculty, like, no, I can make this work. I'll do extra, like double time. Like, I was trying so hard. And I really think the universe was saying, like, you gotta go. Like, and like the funny thing is the opportunity in Miami, it was like full funding, like it was greenlit, like everything,
like the perfect package, and you were like, no, I can't do that.
No. And I remember I stepped off that plane, I got onto that campus, and I said, I had a surge of this is right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh no. I was like, this feels right. And I was terrified. I was terrified to leave. I was terrified to disappoint the family. And I remember when I told the family, there was a few people that were just like, what? How could you go?
I think I might have been one of the few that was like, get the hell out of here.
Yeah, you need to go. Like,
you need to go, girl. You can't stay here anymore.
And the first 2 years, do you remember how adamant? I'm coming back. I'm just going for 3 years. I'm coming back.
I have to tell you, I used to crack up. So at this point, while Melissa was going through this, I had already started to reach a point where I could recognize, like, Melissa, we grew up together. Like, I was with her since she was like a little tiny baby. So I already know Melissa's patterns, and I knew she was terrified. And I knew that her way to deal with it was to say, I'm coming back. And so she would always say this to me. And
do you know, even to this day, like, I'm still like, oh, it's not 100% done. I might be coming back.
How long have you been down there? How long have you been down there?
10 years this year.
Thank you.
Years.
So when I was 31,
I'm seriously happy. So it
was the funniest thing, because every time we talked, I'm coming back. I'm 2.5 years tops. And I was always like, yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll see you in 2.5 years. Go ahead, come back. And then she like really settled in. She's like on fire. And the other funny part about Melissa, and I want to address something that you said earlier, but the other funny part about Melissa is she's so humble with her accomplishments that you don't actually know how well she's doing. But her moving down to Florida and her finding her place and her getting into alignment with what she's supposed to be doing moved along her path to the point where she is a top person in her field. And she's like, it's funny because she goes to me, yeah, I know she's making faces, by the way, right now, people, but it's also because women have a problem with saying good things about themselves. Guys, how long have you been listening? And I still have a problem saying my podcast, and it is my podcast, but I can't say it because it feels uncomfortable. We all have this problem. Melissa very casually would drop on me at random points, like, yeah, so anyway, I was invited to talk as a keynote speaker. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what the hell? You what? Like, that's a big deal. But she's very like, it's that thing about women feeling shame about standing up and saying, like, I'm friggin' amazing and I'm awesome at what I'm doing and I'm killing it. It's a problem we all have. I want to
Wait, I just wanted to bring it full circle because
Yeah.
that was a very long-winded way of saying that. Um, I think a lot of women have that same issue of pushing back on things that need to change and not knowing when to leave a situation and and take a step forward into a new path. Um, because I think again it's that mental load, right? Like I was afraid that if I changed something and I was responsible for all this negative things, and I think we have the tendency to not think about all the possibilities
Yeah.
that exist when you close the door on a negative situation and something that is no longer serving you, what is actually out there waiting for you. And when I finally did that, it set in motion not only my own alignment, but my husband has
Yeah. Oh my
has
God.
really succeeded
He's
down
done really
here.
well, actually.
And as a family, we were able to become what we were supposed to be, I think. And not in a cheesy way, like, trust me. Like, well, I was just complaining to you, like 3 days ago. I'm like, oh my God, my morning resentment because I'm
It's like a fairy tale, but in like a good way.
but in like a solid, like a real way that, so anyway, that was a very long-winded way of saying like, I think we, as women, we always know in our gut when we're supposed to leave something behind and start something in a new way. And I think our fears, our responsibilities, all of these things, it makes us afraid to take that jump and take that risk, but it's so worth it. So if we bring anything into 2025, I really hope that as a community, that is what we can do for each other, is to encourage each other to do that, you know?
There is so that's a big deal. Like it really is that whole recognizing and paying attention to your intuition when you get that feeling of alignment. Now, Melissa surprised me yesterday when we were chatting, when she's like, I'd really like to record with you. And I said to her, I was like, this feels a little bit like synchronicity because I have I have a lot of really wonderful guests that have recorded. I pre-recorded for season 3. And I'm in love with so many of the episodes that I was having a really hard time selecting like the lineup, who's going first, because the first episode to kick off a season is very important to me. Which sounds a little silly because like the whole season is important, but I always feel like the first episode is setting the tone basically for like the rest of the episodes. And so when Melissa was like, I'd really like to record with you, I like jumped on it. I was like, oh, you want to do it tomorrow? Because but it was that feeling. Now, I've had feelings with guests when I record with them. It doesn't happen 100% of the time, but there's a lot of instances where I start chatting with somebody and I tell them like, I'm getting a really good vibe here. Like, let's stay in touch. Like, let's maintain a relationship and maintain contact outside of the podcast. And what's really cool is a lot of them, I've developed all these really great relationships now because I've had the opportunity to meet people. So you have to pay attention to your gut and check in with yourself. Like those are the two big things we want to say here is like checking in with yourself, pay attention to how you're feeling because that's your barometer. Now, Melissa mentioned that due to some things that we grew up with that we associate change with negativity. Now, there's actually a biologic reason for that because your brain as it grows and as it's developing, it gets used to setting up certain patterns and pathways. So this is where like cortisol comes in too, into the mix. Your brain gets used to you reacting and responding to things a certain way. So every day, day in and day out, same scenarios happen and the same responses happen. It's programmed in your brain and it becomes really comfortable. So for people that are in, unfortunately, abusive relationships, for people who are really miserable at work, for people who are just like, unhappily married or, like run the gamut. You get used to feeling a certain way. And so your brain starts to adjust itself to say, I'm supposed to be in this crappy position, or I'm supposed to be unhappy. This is just the way it is. I'm just going to lay down and accept it. Because when you try to change it, it feels weird. The reason it feels weird is because your brain has already determined this pattern. Now, knowing what you know now, when you do try to make a shift, it is going to feel wrong, but that's only because you are reprogramming the wiring that's already in place and that probably has been in place for decades. So the goal here, if you can just get over that little hump of resistance, the light on the other side of that hill is shining so damn bright that you will be shocked at what happens. You will just be shocked. And again, I'll use the podcast as an example. I think I used to say to one of my podcast friends that, like, especially even after Melissa wasn't doing it anymore and it was just me, one, it was like massive imposter syndrome. I was like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, who am I to sit here and have a podcast? Like, what do I know? And then I would get these little moments of like people reaching out and saying, I love it. Please keep going. Please keep going. So it would kind of, bolster me a little bit more. But sure enough, every once in a while, I'd get this feeling of like, what the hell am I doing here? And I told one of my podcast friends that I would literally record an episode, push it live, and then I would like run away from my computer as if that was going to do anything. I would like hide. I would close the computer and run and hide, and I wouldn't look at my metrics. I wouldn't look at anything, and I would hide because I was scared that I was putting something out there that people were going to respond violently to or whatever. And if I had listened to that fear, and if I had went with that and said, you know what, I'm just going to give all this up, the lives that the podcast has touched, they wouldn't have been touched. I wouldn't have this fantastic community of women that I've been starting to build here. The conversations that are happening. I mean, even, our grandmother, I was talking to her about the podcast yesterday. And I mean, to be able to, for us to even have this conversation openly together is so friggin' huge because this wasn't a thing. No. Talking about any of our feelings, talking about what we're going through, talking about really pushing the envelope to find your own life, that wasn't a thing. So this is huge to be able to step into that. So change might feel negative or it might feel uncomfortable, but you have to get over that hump. Now, Melissa, we talked about like the move, we talked about the podcast transition. So professionally, some of you, for those of you who I'm connected to on LinkedIn, you'll see that I'm transitioning in 2025 to a separate agency, to a new role. Now, this doesn't, to me, say anything negative about where I've come from. Like, personally, this is just how I feel about it. You get to a certain point professionally where when you're in a position, you have to be the person to recognize, is this still serving me? Does this still make sense? Now, regardless of how much I loved the work and how much I loved the people, the clients and stuff, I knew in my soul it was no longer right. But I was scared for a very long time to pull the trigger. Yeah. And I had people around me saying like, Jenny, I think it's time. Like, Jenny, you probably want to start. Like, you might want to look elsewhere. And I was scared to pull that trigger because when I was resigning, the person I was chatting with said to me, she was like, well, because it's almost like the devil versus the devil you don't know. And it's a very scary thing. But I will say this. The moment that I pulled the veil back and said, this just doesn't feel right anymore. It's just not in alignment. It doesn't feel right anymore. As soon as I recognized that, things started to fall into place. That got me
immediately.
Like almost immediately. I got a text message within 5 days from somebody saying, hey, I recommended you for something. And I was like, oh, all right. And she was like, oh, just go in and do the X, Y, and Z to get an interview. And then that started to come along. And my vibrational energy started to rise up because I started to get excited about that. With that, I also started to cultivate personal clients for podcasting and doing live broadcasts, because this is something I do as well. Freelance is supporting other people that want to produce podcasts or want to do recordings or want to do live feeds. Like, I do that. That started to develop. So doors started opening the minute that I stopped being afraid. And the minute that I recognized, like, Jenny, you're not in alignment anymore. You're making people miserable. And people, once you're not in alignment, it doesn't matter what you do. You're not putting your best foot forward anymore. So it's making that determination to say, you know what? I know myself well enough to know this is no longer serving me. And if it's not serving me, it's probably not serving you. I need to leave because no one's going to win here.
And the funny part was that you had known in your gut for months that
Like a
And
year.
I remember you were like, no, and you were trying to really hard, just like bring it back into alignment, and you were like, no, like
I was trying to force
we
it so
can make
hard.
this work, like, and then like I remember we were talking one day, and you're like, okay, this isn't gonna work, and literally as soon as you did recognize that, I couldn't believe how quickly
Yeah.
everything else fell into place, you know.
It's
So, and the same thing happened when I went with graduate school and the move here. You know, like when you push back, and then as soon as you really recognize it and you really look at it, and it's crazy how things fall
yeah,
right in and slotted right into place.
like right into place. And
Yeah.
I'll even say this too, like even with me, moving on to a new agency, I originally was like trying to press, as we record this is going to air, I think, on the 12th, but we're recording it a couple days earlier. And this week of January 6th, I happen to have the whole week off. And it's a gap. I've never had a gap before.
I was gonna say, for the first time in I think your adult life,
For the
you
first
have
time
like
in
a week.
17 years that I've been in my industry, I have never had a gap. Every time I moved from one agency to another, I would stop work on like a Friday and start work on a Monday.
Start on a
I never had a gap before. So it was interesting because the way that this gap came about also wasn't really supposed to happen. I was actually supposed to start my new job on the 6th.
Mhm.
I was the one who was like moving dates around. And then it just so happened that this week ended up being a week where I didn't have to do anything. And we had a blizzard on Monday. And by blizzard, I mean the school system overreacted and closed. So for 2 inches of snow or whatever it was. So the kids were home. So thank God it wasn't my first day of work because holy crap, like that would have been terrible.
That's not the way you want to
I didn't even
start.
think about that until just now. But if they had been home and I had to start my first day of work, that would have been bad. So there's that one. Tuesday, I had the opportunity to go and catch up with one of my neighbors and like just have lunch and just be a person, like be a human person, which almost never happens for me because I'm like constantly running around. Melissa knows because she does the same thing. She has a problem. She's working on it. Yesterday I got to visit our grandmother and spend almost the whole day with her just hanging out, which I was like
The best.
that was like the
thing.
highlight of my week. I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah. Like literally.
And then like today we
See,
got to
all of these
record.
great things can happen if you just take,
Just,
take a minute. Take that break.
Where it starts, because if you're hearing this for the first time, a lot of people will hear these kinds of conversations and say, "This is BS. Like this is nonsense."
Yeah. No. We
And
were two of those people.
oh my God.
Hardcore. Like,
Hardcore. People will hear these kinds of conversations, be like, that's crap. Like it's BS. It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. I have, and Melissa, we have both experienced massive shifts in our lives because we started to tune in and because we started to really recognize when things weren't right or things needed to change. It starts with just a gut check.
Mhm.
If you're interested in really scaling your 2025 or really shifting something in your life in 2025, I strongly recommend meditation. It could take you 5 minutes to just start there. If you are nervous about doing that because you're like, I can't sit in silence or my mind goes, because a lot of people think meditation equates to clearing your mind and having a blank like slate in there. That's not actually what it is. It's just recognizing what's going on in your mind and so there's methods to it. Guided meditations are out there. I'm a huge fan of Kathy Heller. She has a guided monthly meditation membership that's like $12. You can make it happen, people. Like, just do it. If you really want 2025 to be the year, don't do a ridiculous like New Year's resolution. Do something legitimate that's actually going to impact the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that is so true because, again, I used to eye roll at when people used to tell me things like this. I used to eye roll and be like, okay, but in real life, I don't have time to do that. And the truth is that you'll never have time until you make it.
No, you'll never have time.
And if you allow, and it could be just like you're saying, start out small, carve out a tiny 5-10 minute space for yourself every day. And you'll be surprised to see how that unfolds.
It's wild. And if you're saying to yourself, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I have my kids with me all the time, I'm never alone, I hear you, and so does Melissa, because we do understand that struggle. Right before you take a shower, do it then.
Yes.
That was the only time I was alone when my kids were little, was right before I was going to take a shower. Do it then. That's your time.
Right as you're laying down to go to sleep. Like these little moments that you don't think of, that usually I would spend racing, okay, like what do I have to do tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. Like just take those 3 to 5 minutes, as you're stepping into the shower, as you're going to sleep, as you're waking up, you'll be surprised that you can actually find it. Yeah. When it's a priority.
You can do this. So couple things for season 3. I'm going to be bringing back Wednesday VIP episodes, so you'll get some additional Jenny time on Wednesdays. Some of those are actually going to be lives, so there will be some live streams happening, which I'm pretty excited about. For live streams, you can follow me on LinkedIn, and that's where you're going to be able to see me there. But I also have a YouTube channel now. So you can also find Steel Roses on YouTube, and videos and things are starting to post there as well. So for every episode that you see on all your podcast platforms, there's an episode on YouTube that you can check out there too. So a lot of good things for 2025. And the guest lineup is really incredible. A lot of really amazing authors. Everybody is just ready to show up and support each other, and that is basically what this is here for. This podcast is here for women's voices only. I'm one of the few podcasts that do that. So I want you all to know I'm here for you for 2025. Melissa's going to be coming back in and popping back in and out as a guest. So it's going to be really exciting. I hope you all stick with me. And again, there's still 4 slots left for the spring winter series. If you're interested in being a guest, just reach out. I'll get you started with intro calls, and we can see what you want to talk about. Thank you all for joining us today, and take care. We'll see you on the next one.
See ya.